So in 2011, the Boston Celtics traded their physical big man Kendrick Perkins to the Oklahoma City Thunder in exchange for intriguing swingman Jeff Green. And I believe you could make the argument that this trade ruined the Celtics in the short term, and it began the downward spiral of the Oklahoma City Thunder, which eventually led to James Harden being a Houston Rocket. Before we can get to all that, let's remember why this trade happened in the first place. Well, in my opinion, there were probably 3 reasons Danny Ainge made this move. The first one was he was comfortable trading Perkins away because he still had Shaquille O'Neal. And before his phantom injury, Shaq was really good for the Celtics. The lineups with him and the starting 5 were devastating, but the team was also super old. And he wanted to shore up the future a little bit more by getting Jeff Green at the wing position. He also got a first-round pick and Nenad Kirstic, who was not as physical as Perk, but was still pretty talented. So you could see the reasoning as to why Danny was comfortable with trading away Perk, who helped them be one of the best defensive teams in the league. Critics of this move immediately said, "What are you doing? The big 3 is in Miami, and the one thing you have over them is your overwhelming size up front." And I'm sure Ainge thought of that as well, but he still pulled the trigger. Now, as far as why OKC made the move, they really needed someone like Kendrick Perkins, that physical center who could just be a presence around the rim, and they also needed someone to match up with the Lakers' front court of Pau Gasol and Andrew Bynum. As for why they were content with giving up Jeff Green, I mean, they had so much damn talent on the perimeter, they were fine with letting him go. You got Westbrook, you have Kevin Durant, and even at this time, KD was already among the best players in the league. And you had James Harden, who had not elevated himself to what we would see of him, but he was pretty damn close. Now, where Danny Ainge made the mistake, if we can get back to the Celtics, is he really overlooked the culture of that Celtics team, the togetherness that they had and that they showed in their 2008 title run. They felt like they lost a piece of that when Kendrick Perkins was no longer there. And then it did not help that towards the end of the season, Shaq hurt himself by walking down floor pretty much. And suddenly, the loss of Perkins ended up being pretty devastating for Boston. He was a presence on the floor, even if it wasn't always the best to watch. And he was a huge piece of what made that team work. Their only other option for physical bigs was Jermaine O'Neal, and that went about as well as you would have expected it to. And when they eventually saw the Miami Heat in the second round of the playoffs, Miami just ran the ball down their throat. The Celtics of a few years ago that were frustrating LeBron and Wade, that was no longer the case. They would beat the Celtics in only 5 games. And Danny Ainge's big get in Jeff Green, his performance in that series was pretty forgettable. While Jeff Green has had some health concerns, and we're happy that he's overcome those and he's been able to stay in the NBA, his tenure with the Celtics was as it was in that series against Miami. It was disappointing. A few flashes here and there of a guy who could be great, but it was never worth it in the end. They eventually traded him to the Grizzlies for a first-round pick, so they kind of climbed out of it, but this hurt them big time in the moment, and the first-round pick they got in the move ended up being Fab Melo, rest in peace to him, so the trade did not exactly work out well for the Celtics. But of course, there are 2 teams involved in this, so let's get back to OKC. To be fair to Perk, he actually wasn't bad right away for the Thunder. He was everything they wanted him to be, which was just a dude who could play 20 to 25 minutes a game, be physical, and just be a serviceable big man. Now, even with all that, I think some people would look back on his time and notice his disappointments in the postseason. Didn't do too much against the Mavericks in 2011. Was pretty bad against the Heat in the finals, although you could give Perkins credit for helping them get to the finals. But even so, someone like Nick Collison was actually way better against Miami than Perkins was. And even with that, I think OKC for the most part got what they expected out of Perkins. The problem was, it also may have led to them losing out on James Harden, because right after the Thunder acquired Perkins from the Celtics, they signed him to a 4-year deal worth $34 million, just locked themselves into his contract. And if we remember, with the James Harden trade controversy, and there's a whole lot of it if you want to surf the internet, Basically, they didn't want to pay the luxury tax, okay? Harden's salary on top of the money they were already committed to, especially after signing Serge Ibaka, the team would have been really expensive. However, it actually would have been affordable if they had not signed Kendrick Perkins to that contract. Let's do a little bit of math. In 2014, the Houston Rockets paid James Harden $13.7 million. Serge Ibaka was getting $12.2 from OKC. Russell Westbrook was being paid $14.6, and then, unsurprisingly, Kevin Durant was making the most at $17.8 million. You add all of that up, and then round it for the sake of convenience, basically $58.5 million. You want to know what the salary cap was in 2014? It was $58.5, and that feared luxury tax was still a ways away. You could have filled out the rest of the roster with minimum contracts and exceptions and kept your big four. Shout out to realgm.com. Now there's a few arguments you can bring up here. The first one is trading for Kendrick Perkins didn't actually ruin OKC, it was that they signed him to a 4-year deal. You are correct, but this is YouTube and I'm trying to get views with an edgy title. The second thing is James Harden's max contract with the Rockets took a massive jump in the 2017 season, and so even if OKC gave him his money in the moment, they would have paid for it down the road, especially because they didn't know that the salary cap was going to jump up to $94 million the way it did. I do see the rationale in that. I think you still go for it because it at least gives you like a 3-year window to compete for a championship, so why not? So yeah, there's a lot to this trade, but you could look back on the Jeff Green-Kendrick Perkins swap and you could say that it didn't really work out well for the Thunder or the Celtics.